social media platforms. So we'll start our first panel discussion. Please let's make welcome. Let's put our phones down, get our hands out, and ready to applaud our moderator in the person of Ayo Ibaru, COO, Northcourt. Let's keep the applause going till he gets to the stage. And he will be introducing and bringing up the panelists. Like I mentioned, you can read all the biographies just by scanning the QR code in the brochures. One more time, a round of applause for him. Okay, so
all right. Good morning, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is an honor to be here, and I'm so glad about the opportunity to speak here and to moderate this panel. As our MC has so eloquently told us, to get a full bio of all the speakers, including myself, you can scan the QR code in the brochures that have been handed over to you. So join me as I welcome Mr. Hakeem Ogunniran, founder, CEO, Eximia Realty Co Ltd and Mercury Nominees Investments Limited. Let's put our hands together for him, please. Let's put our hands together for him, please. Also joining us is Mr. Olaide Agboola, CEO and co-founder, Purple Group. Okay, so I had gotten information that the special advisor to the Lagos State Governor on Housing may not be able to make it, and to take up that position and share with us his wealth of experience is Mr. Fatimileyin. Am I correct? Let's put our hands together for him, please. I think we can rise to our feet. I mean, let's rise to our feet, please. This is 40 years. Let's put our hands together, please. Let's keep clapping till it gets up. Let's keep clapping till it gets up. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So, okay. All right, so we've had quite a lot discussed today from our keynote speakers. Thanks again for giving us a lot of your experience. And, you know, also the gentleman who told us that a certain country is no longer worried about social housing. They've left that now, and they are now discussing luxury housing. I guess my first question, and, you know, I would want your perspectives, would be, what has been the most interesting thing that you have seen since the year started regarding the supply of housing in Nigeria? Because you have different perspectives. What has been the most interesting thing to you? You can go first, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. The supply of housing in Nigeria is not that is without attempt. Our dear friend there has told us what they've been doing in Family 04 before he moved. Also, we know FHA is there. We also know the various housing association is there. We also know federal government is doing direct construction. In the last 6 years, I think the federal government says they've been able to build about 4,600 housing units. If we are going to go 22 million, you know that is pittance. On a cozy ride to federal mortgage, FHA, we discovered that they probably might not have done in their nearly 45 years existence more than 50,000 housing units. And so it's like that. The effort of trying to build houses yourself does not contribute enough because you really can't do it through government institutions. But if we go and subsidize and provide the funding and liquidity in the market, and that properties that are built can be sold, and then the liquidity continues to roll, the likelihood of what we are going to get is that we're going to get almost all the houses we need, because Nigeria has a lot of energy. And that energy is not being utilized as of today. I mentioned when I was talking about what happens in to those soft areas of production of houses. Let's leave the building material and all alone. Even those people are to put it together. We don't add them, because nearly almost about 40 technical schools in Nigeria are moribund. They are no longer going to the schools. And we can drive people back and train them very well. Like almost about $4 billion or so leave Nigeria because of the foreign workers that are coming to work here. I'm now limiting it to Lagos area alone, because by our last count, we have more than 1.5 million foreign workers working in that sector. And they are the best because they are trained. When you see a Messi coming from Republic of Benin, he's had 5 to 7 years of training. When you have a Messi that comes from Nigeria, probably he has no more than 6 months. So you really cannot leave him on site to do anything meaningful. So those are the areas for supply purposes. Those are the areas we have to build on. We have to look at how to ensure that production is made by making the market liquid. So whatever is produced can be sold. And making it for other people qualified to buy. Also, we must train the workers. If we don't do it, we continue to export our money and our job elsewhere. And that has been the experience of Nigeria to date.
So, sorry, sir, before you hand over the microphone, now I had heard the discussion earlier around creating training schools for artisans. Why do you think we don't have that today? Is it that it's not profitable? Is it that no one has put the right structure? Why do you think we don't have it today? Because if it's a good idea and we can make money off it, and it can make all our lives easier through the quality of development, why do you think, in your experience, we don't have this already?
Well, what I think has happened is that the government drops the ball. We now want to build only universities, are converting even technical school to universities. We cannot all be university graduates. There are people who will have to do the work. And it does not put you as inferior to those who went to the university. Those are the things I think we have to put in place. There's hardly any state that doesn't have a technical school today. But I can assure you that you have less than 5 of them working. So if each state has one, it means we'll have 36 training schools that can engage in teaching people how to do plumbing, how to tile, how to do, but they are not doing it. Why? Because they don't see the benefit of it. Let me give you an example. You go to my state in Osun State, they think that when they train is for them. But I always tell them that, look, if you train these people, they can go to Lagos and work, like people coming from Cotonou, and send money home to their parents. So it is the entire development of the sector that is important. And like Rupert said, it must be a deliberate effort. It cannot be left to what do we do next. It has to be deliberate, it has to be planned, and it has to be funded.
A round of applause for that, please. Interestingly, you touched on my next question for you, sir, but I will go to Olaide first, then Hakeem, then I'll come back to you.
Yeah. All right. On the supply side, on the policy direction and changes that I've seen in the last 12 months that have sort of been interesting. I think the most interesting thing for me would be the PENCOM policy on being able to access 25% of your pension for the purpose of acquiring or contributing towards your mortgage in terms of property acquisition. The size of that market, obviously, we all know is about 14 trillion and growing. And 25% access to that is obviously about 4 trillion naira, which implies that if that equates to 25% contribution to a mortgage, then you're probably talking about another 14 trillion naira in terms of demand that's potentially out there. It's a new policy. We're seeing some trend in terms of people trying to access those things. However, with everything that is new and with Nigeria, you get a stifling of policy. The policy is stringent from my own perspective, from the fact
I have a question. You see, when you discuss national policies with most legal minds internationally, they will tell you that Nigeria has some of the best policies available. So I saw what you wanted to do, because I've been on panels with him before. What he wants to do is answer his question with all the time so that I am forced to go to the next person. So that's why I interrupted him. Seeing that I am here, why is it that, no, please give him the microphone back. There are enough mics to go around. Give him back. This is 40. We have mics everywhere. Now, what are your concerns about the implementation of this policy, and what is your confidence level? Now, I know you've had to do a lot of work with government officials and you've made quite a bit of progress, right? But what's your confidence level?
I think the most difficult part of that policy is the fact, I think Mr. Rupen already mentioned that earlier on. The first stage is the developer finance. If you don't fix the developer finance, then you cannot fix a 1 million annual problem in terms of delivering housing, right? Which implies that if you tie a policy to finished product, then you're asking the developer to self-finance without an exit mechanism already pre-assured for a size of an industry at 1 million on an annual basis, right? We're talking about federal government alone delivering 4,000, right? When we are trying to get to 1 million, which means that everybody really needs to be vetted if you want to be a developer and be accredited, and then be able to be encouraged to develop so that we can all be contributing to that national contribution of the housing supply, right? But you cannot talk about supply without talking about demand, and you cannot talk about demand without talking about the financing of that demand, right? Which implies that you also need to go further down the road beyond just provision of accessibility to pension, to create government-supported fund and schemes that helps to mop up that supply and warehouse that supply in a manner that then gets distributed back to the market almost on a concessionary basis. I mean, you can't talk about supply and demand and talk about interest rates at 32, 33% of what we are seeing today. Who's going to take a mortgage at those rates? Who's going to take a mortgage even at 18% where it was? There was a lot of struggle to take mortgages at 18%, right? Talk less of where rates are now because of where MPR is. So you have a cyclical, I think Mr. Rupert talked about a stable economy. It's only in a stable economy you can then talk about penetration of housing into the GDP, right? We have an unstable system, which has been stable for quite a long period of time. unstable system, unstable for quite a long period of time. And then we're talking about increasing that demand. And we're talking about that demand should be increased from accessibility of your contribution towards an expensive mortgage. I think there's a problem with providing policies that don't fit a solution. I think we need to obviously, so the solution is interesting. The implementation looks like a bit warped at the moment.
Let's put our hands together for him, please.
Well, as a follow-up to what Olaide has said, is the fact that the policy is good to release the money, which brings liquidity. But I think there must be a thought process to making that liquidity dovetail to where it can be applied. There is no specific institution that has been made to say, look, this is how to go about it or process. The policy is there as just for you to go and apply. How do I apply to my pension manager? I say, I want to 25%. They just look at me and leave the thing on their table because they are not being told how to ensure that that policy takes off and works. So I think that when policies are there, there must be deliberate efforts to ensure that we think it through and ensure that it's deliverable.
Thank you very much. A round of applause for that, please.
Please, ma'am.
Yeah. All right, Mr. Hakeem.
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, just to answer your question, I just like to start from where Olaide has stopped. I think the fundamental problem is RSA is supposed to be a good policy. The use of RSA, ability to access RSA. You see, but we must understand that any successful housing policy must speak to both supply and demand at the same time. So I think it is the same problem that I've always seen with our NMRC. NMRC is good, but NMRC is a liquidity creating vehicle. It's supposed to refinance mortgages. That means that mortgages must have been created. And that means that assets must have been created. So we have to create assets, create mortgages over those assets, before we then bring in NMRC to come and refinance those mortgages so that we can create further assets. So at any point in time, we have to understand, we have to look at the ecosystem and look at how you create a balance between the supply issues and the demand issues. So that's just to support what Olaide has said. In terms of what has been interesting this year, incidentally, we've spent this week at Shelter Afrique's AGM and conference. We've been in Abuja for 4 days with Femi and co, just came back yesterday, And two things for me came out very strongly. Tuesday was a ministerial roundtable. So this was where all the ministers of housing in Africa presented their scorecard, including our own Minister for Housing. And our Minister for Housing presented that in 8 years, they've done 2,860 houses, and they have 6,200 in the pipeline.
Sorry, I didn't get that number.
They've done 2,860 houses, units, in 8 years.
Someone from the audience said, "Is it?"
And they have
2 million.
They have 6,040 in the pipeline. So that tells me that fundamentally, the solution can never come from government. And I think Mr. Fatima is always very generous. All of us in this industry, I'm not sure we do 20,000 per annum. I would like to be proved wrong, but everybody in this industry on an annual basis, I'm not sure we do 20,000 houses. So that tells two stories. That tells us the size of the opportunities on the positive side, but it also tells us that there are some fundamental structural barrier issues that we must address. And we've all listened to Rupan. You cannot have a successful housing program without dealing with the issue of land. And unfortunately, I always like to talk about land, because I'm a researcher and I'm a teacher. Everything happens on land. You build houses on land, you build hotels on land, So as a country, until we get to that level that we understand the significance of land in this equation, you cannot have scale in a country where there is no certainty of title, you know, and you can look all around you. You've seen Magodo, you've seen Osapa, you've seen recently Ikate, you've seen Iwaya, you know, people have built, they bought houses, you know, 42 years thereafter, there's a judgment that says the land now belongs to us. Everybody is put into trouble. If you look at the value chain of housing, every participant in that chain, the most critical issue to them is security. So the person who wants to buy is interested in the security of what he wants to buy. The financier is interested in security of his funding. The developers are interested in their money coming back. And unless we deal with the issue of land, and we have a fantastic national housing policy, 2012, probably one of the best in the world. You know, it's a 92-page document, you know, and you can just take a look at it, you know, and they talk of land for housing. So we have to go back to those basics and begin to use it to drive the catalyst that we need to do for this industry.
Let's put our hands together for that, please. You know, it's usually a concern when I have to moderate panels and Mr. Hakeem is on that panel, because I know he will attack somebody. Now, my next question will go to you, sir, because you've used the word that I think everyone else has pretty much picked up on, and which is deliberate. You say we have to be deliberate, you know, private sector has to be deliberate, the government has to be deliberate. At its foundation, what do you think the problem of providing housing in Nigeria is? Because again, I will go back to what we heard earlier. People have left social and affordable housing. They are now going into luxury housing. I think it's Egypt that is now doing 1 million units a year. We are doing, what was the number, sir? I'm not sure. I'm the moderator. Hello? I'm not sure.
Yeah.
350 a year.
So divided by eight.
That was the presentation at the ministerial meeting. Anyway, thankfully, I have only 10 or 15 more minutes here. So if you have any questions, you want to be part of the discussion, you can just signify to any of our ushers and they will give you the microphone. Sir, please, over to you.
Thank you. Anything you want to do in life, if you are not deliberate about it, it's only an apple stance. And when you don't have a program really rigid and no jelly-like, you are going to find out you falter along the way. That's what happens. So actually, we want to see a government decision to do something and do it correctly. And know that no matter what obstacle they find on the way, it has to be solved. Because there's no program you start today and plan it that will be exactly like that as you go along the way. 2 years down the line, some things may come up that you are deliberately have to put it back in track. So there must be that determination to ensure it is done. But what I found out is that policies are made by people and they just leave it there and they don't provide the methodology or roadmap to ensure that that policy is implemented and effective. So that's why I said one of the few things to do is with housing. It has to be deliberate. We cannot do what we have been doing is that we have been doing the same thing, trying to provide housing. You can see the figures that are coming up. They are dismayed. They are small. But why? What can we do? If we want to make it big, we have to do a big plan and work towards it and ensure it does. But in that thing, there are too many things, elements to be taken care of. And those are deliberately to be approached and dealt with.
A round of applause for that, please. A round of applause for that. So the next question will go to Olaide, and then Hakeem will have his final question, and then we'll take questions from the audience. So congrats once again. I read your PAT document, strong numbers. I'm also following, like most of us here, your Purple Lekki project, phenomenal, leased out, well done. But you've been able to find your way around raising financing. I know you've done something with Sukuk, which our keynote speaker had rightly mentioned. And I was about to give an epic question and you just interrupted me. Let me start again. So, what are the innovative ways of financing? Because when we drive by your developments, and quite a number of developments, in the room, these things are making progress. What are your ideas around innovative financing for projects?
I think sustainably raising money and is perhaps one of the most difficult things I've had to do in this in the line of business. We have been able to obviously grow gross assets to 45 billion. In all of that, we set out 2 years ago, two and a half years ago, and we set ourselves a target that over the next 5 years, we want to try and deliver 1,000 housing units. This year, we should be dropping a total of 202. As a factor of what we're doing at Purple Lekki, because it's a mixed-use development. But I can tell you, and then right to the back of that, we're trying to deliver additional units of about, we set ourselves a target of about 112, but we're scaling back down to about 60. And that would be a total of 260 all in, right? About a quarter of our target, but I know the challenge that it has, that it comes with, right? It's a difficult task. Real estate is capital consuming, and obviously implies that, even though it's in an area where there's need for significant supply, there is also the need to ensure that the full chain of financing is workable. And at the same time, you have an economic system that's obviously playing around in the negative direction. So you have a lot of things that are pulling and pushing and pulling, and you need to find a sustainable way of ensuring that the entire chain of financing. And then you also have the banking system that's not necessarily supportive of construction finance, which is the developer finance end of it, without necessarily seeing a full set of full offtake, the offtake on the other end, right? Now, do you sell off all of your products on day one, knowing full well that the market is probably going to move 20%? And don't forget, in the last 1 year, 1.5 years, that market moved 50, 60%. We all know that, cost-wise, sales prices. You can plan for 5, 10%. How do you plan for 60, 50, 60% jump in material prices or in land prices, and also expect to continue to talk about affordable houses? So there's a major conundrum in the system and in the market, and we all need to find a solution. And that solution is not just a government solution. It's a joint solution of both government and private sector. And there's no way you can provide a solution without a subsidized approach to pricing, which means that because there's no point planning to sell a property at 50 million naira, but ending up selling it at 100 million naira, which means you've completely taken a whole spectrum of potential buyers off the table, right? But if you have a fixed mechanism of working with the government on a subsidized basis to be able to roll out these schemes, right? Which is why I talked about the warehousing fund. And I think the Housing Solution Fund, I'm not sure a lot of people are aware of it. They have a fund coming up, which is sort of to be a mixture of a mortgage provider at single digit as well as a warehouser in terms of, and that's private sector led. That product in itself should be fully government backed. The scale and size of that fund should be astronomically high when you're talking about the fact that you want to roll out 1 million properties on an annual basis. That is the only way you can have a full liquidity cycle of ensuring developers, the bankers, on the one hand, want to see a full 100% exit mechanism, which is why they don't want to provide construction finance. So there needs to be a guaranteed off-taker that takes all of those things out at the price points that's reflective of the market. But then there also needs to be, on the government side, a support to that to ensure that any subsidized portion that needs to be taken off. So it's a full cycle. And unless we have a full solution that starts from the developer end all the way to the supply end, then we're going to keep having issues about sustainable financing models. For us, we've used the old blended approach. We're looking at that approach, and we're working very closely with our bankers at the moment. And we're working on an approach that hopefully can help subsume and take things forward in a different direction and a sustainable long-term approach. Because funding is expensive, even as you speak right now, at 30%. I don't know how people are doing it. But, you know, all of this means that you have to price it back into the sales price of those properties. It makes it completely difficult. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done. We've used the Sukuk as well. We obviously need to obviously look at the Islamic finance approach more closely. The understanding of the investor market as well also needs to be deepened. There are other approaches to within the Islamic finance. There's Mudaraba, there's Musharaka, there are all the financing models in there. And the real estate is actually one of the prime products for Islamic finance, right? It's well suited. It's meant to provide the flexibility that is required to be able to deliver projects, returns to investors, and also deliver products to the market in itself. So there are opportunities out there, but like we all said, we have the best policies, we have the best, but it's the execution and the approach, and I think everybody just needs to keep working together to see how all of that fits in.
A round of applause for that. Thank you very much, Olaide. Round of applause. All right, the last question, at least that I have, before we go into audience questions, will be to you, dear sir. Considering what we've heard and what you know about financing and the economy, what do you think is the right framework for home ownership for low and mid-income earners in Nigeria?
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, we almost always stress that real estate is intricately tied to the economy. So the macro fundamentals of the economy are always critical whenever you are talking about real estate. And I would like to take my cue from Rupan's presentation. You know, there are two things that stood out from that presentation for me. Number one, we've seen the impact of legislation. You know, lawyers talk of law as an instrument of social engineering. I can see how Malaysia and Pakistan, how they use law to drive home ownership. And I think we also need to do that. Now we have the principal legislation on land in Nigeria, the Land Use Act, 45 years old. It has never been reviewed in 45 years. It has never been reviewed. The last review went to the National Assembly in 2004, and it's still sitting there. You know, so first of all, we need to understand that we need to bring our laws to the realities of the contemporary times. That's very critical. We spoke about the capital market. You know, again, we also must understand that the capital market is supposed to be the forum where real capital is aggregated, and that is where we can get significant funding for housing. In my previous life, I was privileged to have led 5 capital raises in a period of 10 years. You know, 2 bonds, a REIT, a CP program, and a rights issue. And a lot of the time, we tend to underestimate the depths of the retail market in this industry. You know, we always like to just focus on institutionals, you know, but I tell you, there's a great depth. You know, so we need to begin to look at that. We have to start seeing housing as an asset class. You know, I always say that we have to commoditize housing. If we're going to get to where we need to get, we need to commoditize housing. We have to be able to buy and sell houses pretty much the same way you buy and sell any other commodity. Because one of the problems of real estate is that it is an illiquid asset. But unless you create a framework that enables people to just buy and sell, and that's why today, once you build your first house in Ejigbo, when you want to move, you don't want, when you think of the process of selling, of buying, governor's consent, stamping, registration, you just leave the house there suboptimally, and you begin to look for something else, you know, so we need to drive that. We must understand that we are not as rich an economy as a lot of us want us to believe. The bottom 50% in this country only controls 5% of the income. The top 1% control over 25% of the income. So the absorption capacity of the market is very critical. We cannot do without government intervention. All over the world, where you have had successful affordable housing program, it is always a coalition between all the players on the market, the government, the financiers, the developers, the refinanciers. Everybody comes to the table. It is difficult to buy land in the open market, borrow money at commercial rates, do your approval in the same way, go through all the supply chain challenges in the same way, and deliver houses at affordable rates. But when we have a situation where government deliberately and intentionally creates a platform that gives concession to some people, incentives to some people, that deliberately creates that framework that helps you to deliver at low prices. Rupan spoke about inclusionary zoning of houses. You can only have that in a regime where you have a clear-cut framework for coalition between government and private sector. It is when we do that that we can be on the path to affordable housing. Because let's face it, there are people, if you do a 5 million naira house, I did a simple analysis last week, 5 million naira house, use our national minimum wage, affordable housing standard of 33%, it will take 42 years to pay the capital value. Now, where is that patient capital in any market in the world? You know, so we need to begin to rethink, focus on government intervention. I don't want to use the right subsidy where necessary. Have creative means. It's not everybody who will own houses. There are people who will only be able to rent houses. Have solutions that cut across all the various layers of the economy. And then we can begin to be on the path to solving the problems.
A round of applause for that, please. A round of applause for that. So let's just wait. I'm waiting for confirmation from the MC. I have run out of time, but apparently we have 2 questions. So let's see. Do I have time? I have time for 1 question. Okay, I'll go with this. To anyone on the panel, how do we structure and harmonize the various government policies on housing delivery in Nigeria in practical terms to genuinely increase housing supply and provide capacity, open brackets, accessible finance, close brackets, for effective demand, particularly in the affordable housing sector?
Well, harmonization is definitely very key and important. I mean, take for example, you have the Federal Housing Authority, then you have the FMBN, now you have the NMRC, all from the same government body, doing similar things, overlapping things in some certain cases. And there's still a few other, 1 or 2 other ones as well in there. And I think that, the only way you can get this entire system going is obviously a private and public approach of actually sitting down and looking at the chain of what needs to be done. But the most critical aspect of this will definitely have to come from either the Ministry of Finance or the central bank, because that's where the war chest could potentially be. Not necessarily in terms of funding, but in terms of those things that I've mentioned. I've talked about it from the perspective of the guarantees. And I think that for the scale and size of the annual requirement in terms of housing, it's definitely not for government to handle. It's obviously for the private sector to handle, but it's got to be backed by the government. Now, if both sides can sit down and harmonize the functions of all the various aspects of government, and also look at the policies and how the bankers and the finance and the capital markets all come into play, then we can have an harmonized structure that starts from the developer finance and finish all the way to the exit mechanism, as well as delivering those products to the market. So it's got to be a collaborative approach, and it's got to be led from who is going to drive that backing, and that backing can only come from the central bank with the right intervention, not just creating intervention funds and actually trying to fund it with cash, but to actually create interventions that are backed not by guarantees and performance of different aspects of the chain, and that discussion needs to be had at some point.
Okay, I think Mr. Hakeem, I want to also have your thoughts on this and use so that we can round this up. You've done, like you say, in your past life, you've had to work with various state governments, parastatals. How do you see a way forward, having so many institutions doing pretty much the same thing?
Okay, I mean, we were taught goal congruence in management, and we deal with all the institutions, so we feel the tension, Family Homes Fund is under Federal Ministry of Finance. We have Federal Mortgage Bank and Federal Housing Authority under the Ministry of Lands and Housing. They have their own National Housing Finance program, and you can literally feel tension, So first of all, we must understand that goal congruence is critical. We need to all the institutions. We need somebody to bring everybody and let us understand that we're working towards the same goal. Some of us have to come down from our high horses and really see, and it's across from CBN to fish programs. So we have fish program, we have NMRC, we have all these institutions, So we need to rethink the whole process and create a platform that everybody will key into, still performing various functions which they are performing. I've had the privilege of doing 2 or 3 JVs with governments in the past, and I see that some governments recognize that they need help. So when you're working with a government who understands that, we believe that you can bring something valuable to the table, it's a whole lot different than a government that thinks that, no, we know everything, or we know everything more than everybody. You can't get anywhere. So there has to be that understanding on both sides of the table, that we're both bringing value to the table, and that on our side, hey, I always say that as developers, in spite of all these troubles, we are struggling and we are still delivering. Now imagine a situation where we just create a slightly better environment, for developers to thrive. You can only have scale in the kind that we imagine on this matter. Thank you very much.
A round of applause for that, please.
Thank you very much. Like we said earlier, we have too many institutions doing the same thing, and rather inefficiently. Let me take a case of Federal Mortgage Bank. They've been collecting our housing fund. That's there. They are in billions. And let's just examine how many mortgages they give in a year. It's inefficient. If you have institutions that are moribund or inefficient and they are just piling there and you keep creating, what you are doing is that you are just making the entire system unworkable. Because like Rupert says, it's not only in Nigeria, those institutions don't speak to each other. They don't cooperate. And they could, when they cooperate and you put together, then you'll be able to leverage and get scale. If Federal Mortgage Bank is sitting on billions of naira, and they are not giving mortgages, and other institutions are willing to, they must cooperate and ensure that they liquefy the market. So government has to look at what he has, because it's the federal government that has the Ministry of Housing, that has Federal Mortgage Bank, that has an authority, that they should sit down and look at what are all these things, what are they delivering? What can we do with the asset that is in their hands? These people, they have a lot of assets. Even FHA, the asset they have, if we take it to the bank, they can raise a lot of funds that can be used by the industry to deliver housing, even at affordable prices. But if we leave them the way they are and we don't do anything about them, what we're going to have is to have humongous number of institutions that are just inefficient. And if they are inefficient, it makes the entire market inefficient. And then there's no delivery of services to the people. That's what we'll have. So I think it is good to talk to government to say, look at what we have, both ministry or central bank, wherever, let them sit together and work things out as an awesome thing that will work for the country.
Round of applause for all our panelists, please. We have come to the end of this session. Thank you all. You've been very kind.
Thank you very much. Please, let's put our hands together for our moderator and our panelists. Very quickly, can we have the head of practice and strategic advisor join them on stage for a quick photo op very quickly? I haven't been the accurate timekeeper, but I promise to repent now. So I'm going to have to chop up some minutes. The next two panels will only have 30 minutes. And